Welcome to CSI Skill Tree. In this series, we take a close look at video games to examine and celebrate the work they do in envisioning the future and building rich, thought-provoking worlds. My name is Joey Eschrick at Arizona State University's Center for Science and the Imagination, and I'll be your host. Today, we're going to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda, a 2017 game developed by Bioware and published by Electronic Arts. It's available for PlayStation and Xbox consoles, as well as Windows computers. The game followed the incredible success of the original Mass Effect trilogy, which was an interplanetary space opera with an emphasis on player choice and deep dialogue and relationship systems. And for this sequel, if you will, a big leap was taken. This establishes a whole new human protagonist named Ryder. It sets the action hundreds of years after the events of the original trilogy, and it explores an entirely new galaxy, the titular Andromeda. However, like the original trilogy, Andromeda puts you in a third-person perspective. You follow Ryder from over their shoulder as they explore a diverse range of starships, space stations, cities, and planets. They have conversations. They build relationships with a large cast of characters, both human and from a variety of non-human civilizations. They solve some puzzles, which nobody really likes, and they fight with a thrilling mix of gunplay and biotics, which is the franchise's term for a kind of space magic. You can customize your version of Ryder, use this in-depth character creator to craft their unique look and mold their face. You select whether they're a woman, Sarah Ryder, or a man, Scott Ryder, and you shape their relationships and to some extent determine the progression of the plot based on your decisions. So with this game burdened with the weight of anticipation after a wildly successful original trilogy, it was largely considered a disappointment by both fans and critics upon its initial release. And it didn't help that it launched with many technical bugs and glitches, many of which were then fixed in subsequent patches and updates over the course of months and years. But from what I can tell, Andromeda seems to be undergoing a bit of a second life recently. And people are revisiting outside of that immediate context of release and finding a lot more to love, even amidst some lingering issues. And among many other things, Andromeda is a meditation on the dynamics of colonization. Early in the game, Ryder becomes the leader, or a leader, of the Andromeda Initiative, an effort among sentient species from our Milky Way to explore and settle the Andromeda Galaxy, which they believe is likely to support life. They undertake a 600-year journey through deep space, and they don't know whether intelligent life forms have already founded civilizations in this supposed new frontier. So, of course, when we arrive in the galaxy at the start of the game, we quickly do meet members of just such a civilization, the Angara, which are a highly sophisticated interplanetary society, which is already, in fact, in the process of fending off violent incursions from yet another alien species from outside of their star system. So today we're going to delve more deeply into just that, how the game frames colonial relations and dynamics. And to do that, I'm very lucky to have two fantastic guests, Souvik Mukherjee. Hi, Souvik. He is an assistant professor in cultural studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta, India. He's the author of 3 books, Video Games and Storytelling, Video Games and Post-Colonialism, Empire Plays Back, and most recently, Video Games in the Indian Subcontinent, Development, Cultures, and Representations. He's currently working on a book project on Indian board games and colonialism. In 2019, he was named a Distinguished Scholar by the Digital Games Research Association, or DIGRA, and he was a Higher Education Video Game Alliance Fellow in 2022. So thank you so much for being with us today, Souvik.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward.
Yes, us too. I'm also delighted to welcome Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay, an associate professor in the Department of Culture Studies and Oriental Languages at the University of Oslo. He's the principal investigator and lead for Co-Futures, an international research group on global futures funded by the European Research Council. He also runs the Holodeck Games Research Lab at the University of Oslo, and he co-founded the research collective Theory from the Margins. He's co-editor of the books Indian Genre Fictions, Past and Future Histories, as well as the Routledge Handbook of Co-Futurisms, which explores visions of possible futures arising from non-Western cultures and histories. He's also a repeat Skill Tree guest. In 2020, he joined us to talk about the classic space strategy game, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. So this is sort of part 2 of the space duology, buddy. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, both of you. Yeah, I'm just gonna like get us underway. I think I've said quite enough. So Souvik, I'm wondering, as the probably the most enmeshed in the world of Andromeda's story and themes and gameplay, could you talk to us a bit about the game and how you think its mechanics and themes connect with your work on games and colonialism?
Well, I think what you mean to say is I'm the one who's wasted most time on Mass Effect Andromeda, but, and guilty as charged. So yes, so I'm kind of it's kind of a strange-ish intro to the game for me, because while I played the earlier Mass Effect games on in a PC version. Andromeda, at that point I had a new second-hand console, and I was just playing this with on the console. So it was I think, and I probably was kind of using a second-hand copy of the game as well, one of the earlier ones, and it was really buggy. But
Yeah.
so that's what you were kind of referring to earlier. But nevertheless, it was quite engaging, and I think Joey has already introduced the Ryder twins, Scott or Sarah, and then the whole idea of kind of them kind of going to the Andromeda galaxy, and but what was so bizarre for me is that while they have their own problems, the settlers from Milky Way, they even have a department of colonization, basically, and it's kind of it's okay. It's just absolutely the dumb thing within the game mechanic to just look for planets and then mine them for different minerals, and if you and then kind of visit different planets, and then but I think basically the ecosystem or the ecology of the galaxy is kind of is all messed up, and there is some kind of earlier technology that again, it kind of boils down to technology, rediscovering technology that's the settlers must kind of get a handle on, and then of course there are the bad guys which are who are kind of again settlers or would be settlers from another galaxy, really, and they're called the Ket, and they look quite kind of well, different, and quite alienish in the way we kind of look at it, as we are trained to see in films and kind of other lore. So all of this is for me, it was kind of a little surprising because it was so blatant in the way it kind of does colonialism. I mean, they have an actual kind of department of colonialism that was like so bizarre for me. And I'm just going to quickly, very quickly, show you. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me see if I can. Yeah, it's basically the Milky Way mission that is launched to settle the Andromeda galaxy. It comes against huge adversities and oppressive alien species. But look, they have this new kind of this department of colonizing other planets. So how cool is that? And then what we didn't say is that the protagonist of Andromeda is called the Pathfinder. And for me, it reminds me of James Fenimore Cooper's colonial novels, right? And, the whole idea of kind of like where kind of North American kind of landscape is looked at as a sea, which can be colonized or which can be kind of Cooper's protagonist keeps looking at the scenario and just kind of in different avatars, whether it's Hawkeye or as the Pathfinder, and the idea is kind of basically this area is going to be colonized, so that's there, and there is this whole set of codes which are talking about colonial power and control, and I'm just going to quickly just talk about one very quick thing, which is that there are other people who worked on this game, like Thomas Mayakovsky, Magda Kosira, and they've talked about how there is this Victorian literary genre which comes up in this game again and again. But there is also this element, of reverse colonialism. So I think that kind of, where you see the settlers in the game, they're trying to kind of, as it were, free Andromeda of the Ket, who are the bad guys. But then it's kind of they're posing as the victim, whereas they themselves are the colonizers, really. So I'm just going to leave it there. Really, I just kind of had a few ideas to just throw out in there. So basically, my kind of experience was quite troubled, really. I mean, at a game it was so kind of directly espousing colonialism, at the same time kind of using some of the vocabulary that we use to criticize colonialism, but kind of there was this undercurrent, and yeah, so I'll kind of just leave it there.
I think we're going to get back to, we're going to pick up on a lot of things that you just introduced there. So thank you so much as the conversation rolls along. I do want to go over to Bodhi. I do wonder first just what your original or initial encounter was with this game. And also I know that one of the mechanics and story elements that was particularly interesting to you had to do with terraforming, which is a kind of a major mechanic of the game. As Souvik said, there's a kind of environmental disturbances across this star system that you find yourself in, and you end up having to do some remediation in the form of terraforming on these planets. So I'd love to hear more about sort of how you got to the game and then what this terraforming idea in it evoked for you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Souvik, for introducing the colonial theme. I think for me the entry point. So I played the Mass Effect games, and I love the Mass Effect games. But in between, while working on other things, kind of stopped playing for a few years because I was buried deep in the archives of the colonial period, actually. And then I come back to gaming, and this game comes out. So I'm very excited. Like, okay, let's play this, and I think my first sentiment was also one of disappointment. And I think that was shared, as you said, with the community. But it was not so much about the colonial mechanic of it, which I completely understand. I mean, pretty much every science fiction narrative that we deal with in like video games, especially coming out of very much the Anglo-American or the European games industry, is colonial in some fashion or form. And I think we can say a lot more about this than I can. So some of the best games that I like, the games that I enjoy, are also deeply colonial. And same with the books, and same with the TV series, and so on. So one can't really, colonialism is something that I think of in the context of games or in the context of science fiction when I work on it academically. But when I'm playing the game, I just want to enjoy it. And I think where Mass Effect Andromeda at first didn't work for me was actually the enjoyment, because I think I was expecting too much of the old Mass Effect. And this game is actually quite different. And of course, the terraforming mechanic, again, terraforming is deeply connected to colonialism. As an idea, it's deeply connected to colonialism. You go out there, you change and transform the land. I mean, the whole idea of the tabula rasa, John Locke's tabula rasa, came very much from British colonialism and John Locke's theory of what the British could do in South America. So there are all these kinds of connotations with terraforming, with colonialism, with creating a better planet, and so on. Chris Park has written a whole book on terraforming and science fiction. It's a lovely book. But in the game, it's kind of displaced, because the responsibility of terraforming is put on this other civilization, this ancient civilization, which kind of is like the Protheans, but not really, because they're still around. So
I should say the Protheans are the precursor civilization from the first Mass Effect series trilogy, and then this has another precursor civilization, similar kind of lost
highly advanced civilization. I don't remember what they're called, buddy. I've got to be honest. They might just be called like the ancients or something like that, right?
The remnants.
The remnants, that's it. Yeah.
It's remnant tech, and they kind of shift the burden of responsibility of terraforming onto this other species, which I think is or this mechanical species, artificial intelligence, really. So to me, that shift is interesting. Why did they do that? So I think where I think Souvik's point about colonialism and this kind of tension between having a department for colonization, but and at the same time also playing with certain ideas which complicate that concept. I think that same tension kind of plays out in the relation between the humans and the terraforming that goes on. And I see that Souvik is excited, so I'm sure Souvik has more to add on this.
So that's actually a fascinating point, because it's this shifting of responsibility. And similarly with this reverse colonization, and I'm kind of quoting, I just kind of quickly quoted from David Higgins here, whose this book, Reverse Colonization, Science Fiction, Imperial Fantasy, and Alt Victimhood. And he says that overwhelmingly most reverse colonization narratives after 9/11 invite Americans to self-identify as members of developing or colonized groups who are striving for liberation and empowerment. In the popular Mass Effect video game trilogy and Star Trek Enterprise, for example, humans are framed as members of a disadvantaged species, striving to achieve greater power and advantage in galactic civilization. So it's kind of, I mean, it's colonization, and as I've said elsewhere in my book on video games and post-colonialism, that it is the same logic, really. Whether you kind of play as let's say, whether you play as India and conquer Britain, or Britain and conquer India and colonize India, it's the same logic, really. But I mean, what is happening here is that this whole idea of reverse colonization, and I think Dracula or Wells's Morlocks, they're like classic examples of reverse colonization. The fear of the colonizer of being colonized, really. That kind of comes in here. It's a kind of displacement of the colonization. Look, I don't do the colonization. They do, the Ket do the colonization. But bizarrely, we also have a department of colonization. So that's kind of this irony that comes in, really. And it's again very similar to what Bodhi is saying, that we do not do the terraforming. It's the machines that but the machines probably belong to a different civilization. They're remnants, they're AI, but there was something else there, right? Some other people who did it, really. So it's kind of the shift that is quite intriguing for me in Mass Effect Andromeda.
Well, and the notion that you're using what's already there, because when you find, to clarify that, when you find these remnant tech, you go to a planet, it's inhospitable in some way, the atmosphere is poison or something like that, and you have to go into this underground AI controlled vault that was built whatever centuries ago, millennia ago, by this precursor civilization, and you have to activate it. So it's like they have a system they already terraformed. You're just sort of like unlocking the terraforming apparatus and using it, but of course you're using it to terraform the planet to what's going to be most congenial to humans. And meanwhile, on your way to finding these vaults, you have to kill a bunch of the indigenous life forms. I mean, which are like these often like feral beasts of various kinds that you're told are infected or have gone wild in some way, become unusually aggressive. And so you're kind of let off the hook for that. But yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, Bodhi. I think that's such a good point, that the game gives you this permission structure for changing the atmospheres of these planets, for exterminating life forms, for harvesting materials. That's all like, well, you kind of need to you're like Souvik said, you're the victims as much as anybody else, even though again you've got this Department of Colonial Affairs that's literally building cities in otherwise inhabited planets and things like that.
Just also what Bodhi said was the name is also interesting. They're called remnants, remnants of what? There is kind of this idea of this ontology. Colonialism is haunting the very ontology of kind of thinking here. I mean, there's this kind of this machine like this are like ghost-like machines, as it were, coming in, and they remain, they're remnants of something really, and that's what kind of intrigues me, basically, that there is terraforming is already kind of in sort of intertwined in the histories of these planets or the cultures of these planets, and therefore, but the name remnant is actually given by the settlers. We don't know what these machines are called originally, right? So there you go. It's a name that they given.
I wanted to pick up on Souvik, something you talked about a few minutes ago, which is the idea that you've got these like these bad colonizers, and maybe we can talk more about them and the logic for why they're here in this galaxy. But then also you're the good colonizers. You're the ones who want to help everybody and work, make things work, and that's how it's framed for the most part. If we dig a little bit more into the mechanics of this like good colonizers, bad colonizers dichotomy the game sets up, I feel like it gets us into like, okay, why are people doing this? And it's like the economics of it, the philosophy of it. And I think the game is very engaged in that mechanically and narratively in justifying exploration, as they might call it, or settlement. But then also creating economies around what's happening. How do we survive? How do we get resources to people? So I'm wondering if you or the two of you could talk a little bit more about like the different kind of philosophies of colonization, different economics that the game tries to set up with the Ket and the Milky Way folks.
So I wanted to show you this. I did tell you that I had those video clips, but I wasn't able to find them. But this is the first time when Ryder encounters the Ket leader, and the leader is called the Archon, and one of the things that in the dialogue is I won't explain what you can't understand. So this is how actually the other looks to Ryder and the Milky Way settlers, right? It's kind of the otherization of the other, of the Ket, really. Now, let me pose an interesting kind of parallel. Let us replace the Ket and the Milky Way settlers with the British and the Russians, right? Both trying to colonize, let's say, a certain kind of landmass, and then if you look at kind of colonial discourses, the whole idea of the great game that they're playing. They're also playing, they're calling it a game, really. And you can see the dynamics playing out, really, how they look really to each other. And I have this Punch cartoon of the British gentleman kind of chaining a Russian bear, and the bear is kind of dancing to his tune and so on. So you can see, again, there is this notion of kind of othering, I mean, one colonizer and vis-a-vis another. And of course, kind of, then there are, of course, the poor Angara in the planets, and then there are the remnants, and then, as you said, there are these kind of other life forms whom we don't kind of really even consider, and just going to keep shooting at. So I think it's a complicated scenario of kind of who is colonizer, who is not, and who. How we're going to construct these kind of identities, which is why I think, I mean, despite its bugs, I think Mass Effect Andromeda is a great game to study for many other reasons, really, because it brings up all these kind of issues. So I wanted to quickly say that I totally forgot when I was talking, when you finish so this is spoiler warning, sorry, spoiler alert, but well, at some stage of the game, the writer actually picks up a book, and it's actually Lewis and Clark's kind of account of this going to the Pacific. So again, kind of this idea of exploration, colonization. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So
yeah, it does sound. I mean, there is this knowingness, and it sounds like you both picked up on this when you played, like in the game, about, I mean, to use an overused word, how problematic all this is, right? It's like this is a mess. It's probably, you know, there's a good like exploitative dynamics going on that we're modeling out here and inviting you to play in. But we know it's weird, you know, like we know that this stuff's thorny and it's kind of a problem. And so the game, like the two of you have talked about tension or ambiguity, those kinds of dynamics in the game, it does seem like that knowingness, that those gestures at reflexivity about the underlying history that informs this is it kind of haunts the game. It makes the game a little bit riven, at odds with itself sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, just jumping in here also with the whole like reverse colonization idea and so on. But I like the quote about Star Trek, because Star Trek does actually have a very similar kind of structure in some ways. But it's also the question of you know, the first contact. And that is another thing that, you know, looking at the Archon for that matter, or the first encounter with the Kit, or with Angara, for instance, there's this whole first contact scenario, right? And I think the good colonizer and bad colonizer kind of distinction is interesting, because one comes with a gun and the other comes in the form of dialogue. Right. So we are here to establish dialogue. We are here to establish relations. Like we're going to colonize this planet, but we're going to do it in a nice way. We're going to work with the natives and work with them towards their own colonization as well, and save them from the bad colonizer. Right. So this whole narrative is very explicit in this, and I think that's you know, in some ways, it's quite. In some ways, it's quite superficial, right? That, you know, we're just going to give it all to you in this package. This is how the good guys are going to look. This is how the bad guys are going to look. The bad guys are going to come with these kinds of guns, and they want to, you know, and then the whole process that they have, I think where colonization becomes really, really important to the plot is not so much terraforming, but the themes of eugenics that are absolutely central to what the Kit are doing to the Angara, to other species, to the other native life, which is that they are being exalted, they are being transformed into becoming this superior life form that they consider superior, of course, and that is the Kit. So that narrative of eugenics, I think this is going back to colonialism, going back to the colonial period, and the good colonizer versus the bad colonizer argument. So one is pretty much the Nazi version of it, that we're going to, you know, we're going to have like, you know, eugenics. We're going to create the Ubermensch kind of narrative. You know, the strong fighter, which is the Kit. And then there's the British colonizer, right? The one who also has guns, but who wants dialogue. End of the day, this is dialogue, this is trade, and so on. So I think eugenics is one of those themes where in this narrative, since both are engaging in colonialism of different kinds, it's the eugenics that defines their difference, or that clarifies, you know, who the really bad colonizers are. So that's my sense of it in terms of morality and also in terms of history, that this is the kind of narrative that it is playing with.
So may I just chip in here with a very quick comparison? Because you also went to Star Trek. I was thinking of the Borg, and we will assimilate everything and kind of that. So the Ket are also doing something like that, in the sense that they're doing it with the eugenics. Basically, they're going to create kind of Ket, and all these different Kets are actually other kinds of life forms which have been assimilated. And who knows what we might find in other galaxies which the Ket have kind of invaded. But here you have these. There's this Ket boss, which is particularly difficult to beat. I forget what it is called. They have all these weird kind of names, and I think Ket rates, then something else. And this one I remember is it vanishes as well. So it goes invisible for a while, and it's just really annoying. I mean, well, I have to kind of rely on all my sniping and kind of other skills to be able to, and hiding skills. But it's really I think it's one of the priest-like creatures, basically. But the fact that they're kind of actually creating these categories, and then there is this whole narrative of eugenics. But here I wanted to ask Bodhi and you as well one question, which is, with colonialism, there's always this fascination for maintaining categories. There is this fear of the hybrid, right? Baba and others. But the Ket are kind of happy with creating these hybrids. Of course, having said that, the hybrids, whatever they are, they're ultimately finally Ket. They get into the category. So I don't know what you think, really. Yeah.
The thing that I was going to say, and I think perhaps it relates, but I'd love to hear what your response is to Souvik's question, Bodhi. But I'll give you a moment this way, which is that, especially if you've played the original Mass Effect trilogy, I think one of the moral lessons that it presents is that there is strength in diversity. That is like a kind of big, it's part of the DNA of the series, I think. You're always creating a kind of multi-species crew, and some people are hard to get along with, and you're learning about each other's cultures and the history of your interactions with each other. There's this whole well-documented galactic history of war and peace and diplomacy and cultural exchange and trade. And you play that back out in microcosm in your crew. You have this ship that you move around in. Everybody's got their own zones of the ship and expertise. And then that diversity plays in the way that people take on different classes in combat. You'll have people who are technical experts or people who are biotic users who are kind of like force users almost, right? They basically magic wizards. And then, you've got your security types, your, sort of military folks, and they all kind of complement each other in fighting. So on the other hand, we see the Ket in this game, and as you two said, it's about this eugenics project of assimilating everybody into one species. And even if they're kind of taking a mosaic of DNA and genetic traits and kind of mixing them into this exalted form, as Souvik said, it's all finally Ket, and they all, the name Ket, and they take on the Ket aesthetic, which is this kind of lightly HR geegery kind of body horror, exoskeleton-y sort of thing, but also looking like a little bit like cats. They're a little feline in some sense. But that sense of like a kind of aggressive melting pot of like taking everybody and pushing them into one form and uniformity and an incredible sense of hierarchy and networked intelligence kind of among the Ket, who seem to be able to kind of share information and power and memory and in various ways. So this sense of like a hive, and then on one hand, and this is referring to Alpha Centauri too, Bodhi, the hive, on one hand, these conformist eugenicists, and then on the other hand, this kind of panoply of diverse races and civilizations working together across difference to achieve some lofty aim, supposedly. Here it's a colonial aim. That is in some ways the moral binary, I think, that gets set up by the game, and that it's another structure of justification that makes sure that that you're on the good guy's side in some sense.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I mean, this is kind of like the Federation logic. Here's the Federation pin. This is kind of the Federation logic that you have to have a ship with all these different people of different colors or species or planets, howsoever one wants to create it. So that with this diverse model, that this ship is good. Right. And I think, I mean, it's the Tempest. It's an interesting name for a ship. But I also think that, Souvik, your question about the fear of the hybrid. And I think that it's really a question of how the hybrid, is contained. So what are the categories that contain the hybrid, right? And I think that with the Ket and the way that these are the bad guys is because they are, end of the day, not hybrid, right? They are very much the Borg model, like their what is that? Their technological sophistication has been added to the hive, and they are the Ket, right? So I think that this model of looking at the world, I think there's a black and white version of this. This is also very much, in some senses, America and the rest of the world, right? That the rest of the world, the Chinese are one people, right? The Indians are one people, but America is diverse, right? So this logic of looking at, the other as extremely homogeneous, while looking at oneself as diverse, because one celebrates the plurality, one celebrates the the multiplicity of voices in there. I think that's very much part also of the colonial mission, right? Of the colonial argument, that because we are diverse, we get to dictate what is good, right? Because diversity is good, right? So, but there is no inherent value in diversity anymore. There is any inherent value in singular voices. There's no inherent value in either. It's a question of how those are channeled. And I think that with the kit, it's very, very clear that the hybrid is actually contained, right? One of the structures which I find really interesting in the Mass Effect series overall is that it plays with the structure of diplomacy. Is that there is a structure of argument, there are councils, there are different factions who are constantly arguing with each other, right? Or engaging in diplomacy, right? And there is a certain democratic ideal behind the diversity, and I think that is quite a fun thing to kind of note. The villains are always singular.
So I was thinking that some of the Ket are actually not yet fully Ket, so they're not yet exalted completely. So that also is a problem situation. So there may be a little more Angaran than the Ket would like, or a little more Krogan than the Ket would like. So that's also that there, this about hybridity. And also it's interesting that Bodhi brought up the name The Tempest. And of course, we are looking at Shakespeare's plays with its colonial kind of like direct kind of colonial collection. And when I was playing this game, to be honest, I thought that this is, I mean, somebody who's written it or people who've written it, they probably tried to do some kind of a response essay to colonialism, because it seems to me that they're ticking all those boxes, really. Even calling the ship Tempest, and so that's it's very much a conscious kind of attempt, really, to talk about this, and that is what kind of, despite its bugginess, despite its kind of other problems, that is what I've actually began to start like this game more after playing it like once and then kind of a second time and thinking about it again. Yeah. So
I did want to take a moment actually and carve out a space to just say like how you felt about playing the game. I feel like I don't think we've been hard on it, but we've been very analytical about it and haven't talked a lot about the experience of playing it. And I'll just say, like, I actually, just for my money, I found this game's combat to be really fun. It's very dynamic. It is a bit more fluid. You can move quite a lot faster and cover larger distances and use cover more than in the original trilogy, which is the combat is a little slower there on purpose. This is very it's very dynamic, and it's not maybe quite as tactically demanding as some of the earlier games. But then the first Mass Effect, you're stuck hiding behind cover, hiding behind boxes quite a lot. It's really a cover shooter. And this one, you're flying around, you have this sort of jetpack, and there's a lot of really interesting aerial moves, and the abilities that you and your party mates use all combo together, and you could create these huge effects that way. That gets to the kind of like interspecies and intersectoral cooperation that I talked about earlier, that like the more that you're bringing in different types of abilities, you can create these kind of emergent effects on the battlefield that are really strong. And we could talk more about dialogue and things like that too. I think we might want to pause and talk about the Bioware signature of all of this with the incredible amount of writing that goes into this. But yeah, I don't know. I'd like to hear if there's a system or mechanic or a part of the game or something that really spoke to either of you. You know, sort of before we get on with more of our cultural commentary about it.
Yeah. I mean, when I replayed the game, and with every replay, I think this game gets better. Because you get more used to the combat style and so on, and I agree that the combat style is actually really good, compared especially to Mass Effect 1. I would say. I mean, it changes.
Yeah, every
I
game
really-
is slightly different. We should say each Mass Effect game is a slightly different iteration of the combat.
So yes, jetpacks are cool. I also think that one of the things with the game is how beautiful it is visually. Like, you know, that is because they moved to a different engine, different game development engine for this particular game, right? Which is one of the reasons why it was criticized, because some of the animation seemed a bit stilted. But when one plays it, and with all the patches and so on and so forth, it is actually a really beautiful open world game. And I think that you know, there is something to the kind of you know, to the kind of exploration mechanic that one has in Mass Effect Andromeda, which is quite different in flavor from the Mass Effect games, and also much more enjoyable. I mean, I could spend hours just traveling, you know, just walking around, right? And there is something very beautiful about it. I don't know what what Souvik thinks about it.
Yeah, I actually really like the space travel. So I was really glad to have my little own personal version of the Millennium Falcon to kind of fly around, which is this small, from the ship, and then kind of go around and have my crew. And quite enjoyed the romance as well. I'm not going to tell you which character I played as, but yeah, well, multiple iterations. I enjoyed the romance. I enjoyed kind of like the. There was, and I'm mentioning this because you have already spoken about the fighting in it, the combat, but the characters were very, very people that I could relate to. Or well, kind of not people, but yeah, the characters that I could relate to. And I think there was a situation where I had to save. What was the name of the Krogan? Yeah, I had to save him, and yeah. Sorry, it's just my memory is like a sieve, but yeah, and it felt like real. It felt like, yeah, I really have to save him. It's like a friend that you. All of that was kind of quite well scripted, and also similarly with the Angara as well, to protect them, and that kind of. That felt really nice, and also the space travel as well. In the middle of the game, I mean, after you kind of reach a certain level. I also like the idea of upgrading, the whole upgrading thing of weapons, which is like very common in most games, but it seemed like quite kind of, sort of, well, it seemed quite believable, really, in the context. That was what I thought, and also yes, the lack of ammunition. You didn't get like so much, loads of ammunition the moment you kind of shot somebody or try to collect it. So it is a difficult game, and I tell you, I mean, I may be long in the tooth now. I am aging, but I'm no mean gamer. I kind of I'm very good with shooters, and it was quite challenging really to kind of battle the get anointed. Yes, the ones with the plasma guns and barriers and all of that. So it was really it was a challenge, really.
Yeah.
In the initial levels, it was they were almost like near difficult to beat. So that
I'm glad that oh, by the way, that character's name, I looked it up, is Drac, who you save. He's a Krogan character. Yeah. I mean, I think we're gonna we'll see if we talk more about the characters or not. I actually wanted to pick up on something that you just mentioned, which was something I was planning to ask about, which is the tech trees and the fact that you do. So in this game, you have a huge amount of sort of a dizzying amount of customization and upgrading you can do to all your various vehicles. You have a ground vehicle, you have your ship, you've got your armor, you've got your guns, you've got, the armor's in multiple parts. The guns are in multiple parts, and you can take different upgrades from the different civilizations. So the Angara, the Ket actually too, you get remnant technology, you can invest in just Milky Way technology. And like you said, Souvik, it is believable in a sense because it's like, well, they couldn't actually bring everything over. And so the idea that they have to build things in situ actually makes some sense. It's a layer of kind of narrative cohesion that you don't always get with upgrading your gear. But also, like, I think it gets to another one of the game's values. I wonder if the two of you have something to say about this in light of the discussion about colonialism, which is that, the scientific character of your mission is, I think, often used as a way to sort of soften the blow of the colonial violence that you're meting out, which is, like when you get to put a base down on a planet, you get to decide whether it's a science base or a military base. And, you're always making investments in these technology trees. So I also really found the customization fun. I love playing around with tech trees and stuff like that. But on this playthrough for this conversation, I was thinking about like, well, why is, does it make some narrative sense that there's so much focus on all of this technology development? And I do think it might, I don't know, my notion is maybe it has something to do with the game's use of science as a kind of revisiting an idea that you introduced, Bodhi, taking something perhaps as morally neutral as a scientific enterprise and saying that it's actually like this great ethical boon for the mission that justifies a lot of what you're doing.
Oh, I can go on about tech trees. I love tech trees. I very much enjoyed the customizability. As Souvik said, it's really, there's a lot. But in terms of like thinking with the scientific character, like, this is established quite early on, and that again goes back to something like Star Trek, right? That this is a mission of science, this is a mission of exploration. It's not a mission of conquest, right? Which also reflects in the kind of combat that one sees, that you get increasingly militarized, right? Because you are faced with an external threat, right? So your guns and all your weapons and all your tech will constantly be upgraded because the enemy is a hard ass, right? So you need to basically toughen up. This is also the logic of Star Trek, right? Like with a lot of like if you compare, for instance, Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, right? Because one is facing an external threat, you get increasingly militarized, you get different kinds of tech and so on, versus, oh, we are on a mission of peace and we are here to explore, right? So I think there is a very nice logic that I think Andromeda uses, but also a lot of other games use, which is why, but there is a philosophical logic to why there are upgrades, because your enemies are also getting stronger. You didn't come on a mission to fight. You didn't come here to basically take over by force, but you now have to. So it's a choice, right? So when they colonize like EOS and terraform it, so that's the choice. That's when you make the choice. And I think that it kind of determines the gameplay in a way, what you want to do. That this is going to be a military game, or it's going to be end of the day a game of science. That's the logic I feel that they were going for.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and but yes, I mean, it's either military or science. The outpost in the island, for example, when you kind of when you terraform it, you decide to terraform it, you do it in one way or the other. You generate one resource for the other. But what is interesting is that this secretary for the colonization department always turns up in the sense, back in the place, military or otherwise, she's there, and it's kind of there that this is the colony, and of course we're not we're not doing any bad thing. We're not bad colonizers. We're just taking over, terraforming a little bit, and so that's always also there. She's kind of always just enters that kind of space. So yeah, also I think there is a planet where I think some of the Krogans have kind of gone to this planet, have colonized it for themselves. So they're kind of like a renegade group. Yeah, desert, exactly. So that this is again kind of the correct pathway to colonize versus the renegade kind of scenario, and how they need to be brought back to the fold. So it gives you all these multiple scenarios really of the situation, which is why I didn't say it really. I shied short of saying this. It's like a thesis on colonialism. Somebody, a master's thesis, or somebody that might have, somebody might have essayed in a game, really, because they seem to be ticking all these boxes. And when I played again and again, of course, when the difficulty level is kind of a little softened, and when I know what I'm going to expect, and you can go and think about these kind of things, and it's fun, really.
Yeah, I think one of the game's part of this thesis about colonialism is there is a sort of an element of auto critique that's happening as you go through the plot that you can't change, which is that the whole colonization effort from the Milky Way is a mess. Like everything gets screwed up. There's this space debris that you come into contact with, and it splays your ships all over the place, and you lose contact. And there's this whole, and then there's all these breakaway groups that start. There's like pirates basically that set up in one planet, and you've got the Krogans, like you said, Souvik, who one of the civilizations that sets up its own outpost and doesn't want to be part of the larger effort anymore. And like you said, you're kind of charged, of course, with knitting all these factions back together. But there is this sense that like they are acknowledging like this is a mess, and it is chaotic, and people are on this mission for different reasons. Of course, you find out that some people want more power, some people want to escape their lives, some people have sort of rough or criminal or disadvantaged backgrounds, and so they come in with all of these different reasons to go to this other place, to displace themselves, and so much in time and space. I mean, running away from their pasts in 6 centuries forward, right? And that I think the game, if you start criticizing it, quickly says, well, we know this is a mess. This is like, it's not working well. Like regardless of how much planning that goes on, this is going to be a sort of violent and fractious process. So I think that's sort of built in too, as you encounter, like you said, all of these different check boxes of all the different scenarios for how a colonization effort can play out. I did want to ask you too, before we run out of time, actually, I think the thing that we haven't talked about is the colonized, in a sense, which is like there's these Angara, this whole civilization that we talked about a bit, but we haven't dwelled on too much. One of my favorite parts of the game actually is when you go and you're helping a museum curator who's an Angaran who's trying to collect artifacts, and you get to tour the museum, and it's like one of the big info dumps in the game for learning about this planet and their society. Also, I like when you first come to their city, no one trusts you, no one likes you, and everybody thinks you're kind of weird looking. And so there's this whole, like, it gets to what you were saying, Souvik, about the idea that puts the colonizer, the reverse colonization, puts them in the guise of being kind of this like this othered or oppressed person. Like you get this experience of people don't trust you, people don't like you, kind of thing. But I do think it's well played out in the game, and really you feel estranged, transported in a big way. But the Angarans this time through, I was realizing, just because of when we're recording this, possibly are evoking James Cameron's Avatar in a pretty big way. I mean, there was some sense to me. I do wonder what you two think about this notion of the Angarans as this like are they fitting into kind of this noble savage trope that is certainly played with in the Avatar franchise? I don't know. You know, the Angarans are really technologically advanced in a certain way. They're characterized by a certain sort of spirituality. And there's a sort of matriarchal element to some of their culture and religion. And then they seem to live very much in harmony with nature, right? Which is like the kind of thing that you'd expect. Like they have this more biophilic mode of building cities and perhaps stewarding the environment, which is in contradistinction not just to the Ket, but also to your civilization. Like everything of their architecture and stuff seems much more enmeshed with the surroundings. They're building into waterfalls and in forests and stuff like that, whereas you're just dropping these huge container ships of pre-built cities onto these planets. So I don't know. I wondered what you two thought about the way the Angarans were depicted as part of this whole game. So we've been talking a lot about the process of colonization, but they're in some ways the frontline recipients of a lot of the colonial violence that we're seeing in the game.
Well, the Angarans, yes. I mean, you actually said it all. Really, I mean, I actually, you asked whether I thought if there were the noble savage, and I think certainly there is one kind of branch of the Angara that are really, and there is the other which has a science kind of more kind of scientific, mechanical engineering kind of role there. But so they're also, I mean, one of the things, you know, basically what we are ending up doing is, although we started saying that this game has its negative kind of sides, and we're actually kind of ending up praising the game more and more. At least I am.
The more I play it, like the two of you, the more times I play it, the more I'm like, there's a lot going on here. It's not perfect, but it's really kind of swimming in some deep water, you know?
And whoever has done it, I mean, I think it's kind of purposely done. The things that worry us, they're there on purpose. They've been put there on purpose because this is like textbook post-colonialism, which is being put there. Some of these things there, and we have fantastic text for people who want to study post-colonialism because it gives you all the scenarios. And with the Angara too, you have the civilization which is kind of, it's complicated. The civil, you know, they're not kind of like straightforward one kind of thing. So
yeah, it's very factional. We should say, like, it's very factional within their civilization. Like, you get a sense that there's like power struggles and differences of opinion. You don't get the uniformity that the two of you were talking about earlier.
And when I see an Angara, I don't expect the Angara to come to me with a baslet like the Klingon or kind of, you know. So that it's kind of of course, Bodhi is better kind of qualified to talk about Star Trek and the Klingon, but I'm just kind of maybe that was a bad example, but I'm just wanting to say that, you know, they're not a straightforward kind of stereotypical character or kind of race really, and so, I mean, they also have different ways of negotiating the Ket, really. I think at some point, Bodhi mentioned diplomacy, and they probably exercise diplomacy in certain ways, really. I mean, there are some that oppose the Ket directly. There are some that kind of use more underhand methods or more diplomatic methods to deal with the Ket. I mean, after all, they're there. They're not entirely kind of wiped out by the Ket because the Ket find them, you know, or kind of have some use for them in some respects or the other. So it's also kind of a little complicated. That's my kind of like 2 pennies now. Over to Billy.
I mean, I absolutely agree with the complexity part of it, because there's also people within the Angarans who are collaborating. We see a collaborator in game, you know, somebody who was working with the Ket. So I think that, but again, I think the complexity is generally reserved for the good guys. You know, the bad guys are a lot less complex. Right, and I think the same goes for the Angarans, and also, I mean, the Avatar comparison is actually interesting, because when we see Avatar 2, we already see that there are different kinds of Navi, right? And while they share some similar philosophical ideas, they are actually quite different in the way they live, in the way they act, in the way they also think of outsiders. So this is so I think with the Angarans, that's also quite clear. I think they fall pretty much within, they don't fall so much within the noble savage trope as, you know, the native who needs to be rescued by somebody superior trope. You know, they're not necessarily savage, but they still need to be rescued. And I think that's the dynamic there. At least I feel that's the dynamic.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to open up here, because I kind of like, I feel like we have to, which is to say that Bioware, the studio made this game, is famous for dialogue trees, for branching conversations. And this game has a tremendous amount of writing. I mean, I can't give a word count, but somebody probably has done one. And I'll set this up again, like you can't get away from it, with a little bit with reference to the original trilogy. So in the original trilogy, a lot of your decisions mapped onto a morality system that had two poles, Paragon and Renegade. So Paragon was like, in Dungeons and Dragons, like lawful good. Like it was like, you know, you're sort of due process oriented and sometimes de-escalating and being more diplomatic. And the Renegades like need to get stuff done. The means justify the ends. Or ends justify the means, excuse me. And, you know, sometimes a little bit more aggressive or assertive. This doesn't have that. And, you know, in the original trilogy, the Paragon Renegade system informed a lot of the major plot decisions that you made, like that had an effect, and it determined to some extent whether certain characters liked you or not, and even had an effect sometimes on your abilities when you were fighting and speaking to people, trying to persuade them or intimidate them. This, you know, this system isn't in this game. It largely dispenses with a morality system, and instead you have these choices that are about different, I don't know, strategies for approaching a situation. You might try to be more tactful and analytical. You might try to be more empathetic and emotionally open. You might try to be a bit more aggressive. But one of the great criticisms lobbed at this game early on anyway was that like none of that stuff mattered, that it was all cosmetic. So I was wondering what the two of you thought about it, about the dialogue system. You know, it sounds like we've all played this game multiple times. What was your kind of experience of the dialogue system, and how do you think it maybe plays into a lot of, you know, the sort of thematic tapestry we've been talking about in the plot and the character? You know, I feel like it's got to be tied up in all of this because it is one of the major ways that you actually interact with all of the characters and situations we've been discussing.
I think the question really is whether all that dialogue leads to anything. You know, and I think that is one major difference from the Paragon Renegade system. But I looked it up. It has 65,000 lines of dialogue, and over like it's like over 500,000 words, right? So it's a big narrative, right? And other than, of course, you know, things like romance, for instance, which are, I think, central to all the Mass Effect games. I think this is, you know, at least my feeling was that the dialogue is actually largely just superficial. That I could be wrong, you know, but I played this, I think, 3 times the game, and my feeling hasn't really changed. That because the end results are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect gameplay. There's good things about it and there's bad things about it. You know, I like games which, I mean, the Paragon Renegade system. I mean, there's that in Mass Effect. A lot of games have this kind of like choice where you know, go to the light side or the dark side kind of choice, right? And I think that here the character doesn't have an option to go to the dark side. You know, what they're gonna remain, you know, the pathfinder. They're gonna remain the hero. They're gonna remain, you know, the person who solves the problem, right? So there's no actual consequence to it. That's my feeling anyway.
Well, the 65,000 kind of lines notwithstanding, I mean, I would kind of agree with Bodhi here, because ultimately the game moves towards a certain ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although having said that, and also agreeing with Bodhi's earlier comment, like the Ket are not as complicated, the bad guys are not as complicated, but the top bad guy in the Ket, the Archon, seems to be a little more complicated. And he seems to be, he's not even doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's gone a little off piste, right? So his deputy kind of betrays him, yeah? So he's kind of, he's got his other, you know, he's gone, he's not entirely gone rogue, like, let's say, Kurtz in Heart of Darkness, or Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, but he's kind of, you know, on the way there. You know, I think he's kind of doing things his own way, and that there is that complication there, but the game obviously forecloses that. The, you know, it makes that kind of one ending, one preferred, you know, it pushes you more towards a certain kind of an ending, really. That's the thing.
Yeah, perhaps your most consequential decision through dialogue is the romance that we've been referring to, which is that you can decide if you would like to have a romantic relationship with one of the characters in the game. And there, the dialogue choices, I mean, it's fairly well signposted, but it does matter. You know, you have to build rapport with that person and spend time with them and things like that. But I will say this system, even if we're being somewhat critical of it, it has proved somewhat influential, at least in the sense that, like, another science fiction series, Horizon Zero Dawn, Horizon Forbidden West, uses a very similar dialogue system, which is that you have these icons that refer to different kind of conversational tacts or sort of emotional colors, and they don't have a huge amount of narrative significance. And I would guess that at Guerrilla Games and at the team at Bioware who made this, they would say that it's more about role playing, that it's about your vision of the character, that you're actually speaking the character back to yourself in a sense. Like, my writer is very emotionally forthcoming and open about her experiences. My writer is a cold fish, is very analytical, you know, doesn't give much of herself to people, whatever. And that, you know, becomes kind of like a stand-in for, like you said, like, you can't make then very many super consequential plot decisions. There aren't a lot of A/B trajectories. You can't become evil, whatever. And so it becomes like, well, what kind of, like, what's the personality type that you're kind of living into? It is interesting though, yeah, because I think this system was criticized so roundly. And then, I mean, I'm just picking Mass Effect or Horizon rather, because I know those games, but like, this sort of style has remained and continues in role-playing games of having like a ton of writing, but having it not actually change the course of the plot, which is sort of an interesting dichotomy, I think. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I've taken up quite a bit of both of your time, and I really appreciate you being here with me today. Do either of you have anything you think we should have gotten to, or any final words on Mass Effect Andromeda, things that I haven't asked about?
I would want to say like very, very few words here, which is on not just Mass Effect Andromeda, on something that Bodhi's already addressed about SF in video games. And it seems like Emily Apter in her book once commented that does post-colonial cultural production sit in a preterite time zone? Because it doesn't seem like kind of post-colonialism really engages with kind of SF and some other genres. And SF also kind of, especially in games, just continues ignoring the fact that there is something called post-colonialism, and it just kind of persists long after decolonization, really. Of course, there are also other kind of sort of interventions like African science fiction. But I would also like to hear kind of go to something that Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay Bodhi refers to as the mythologerm. and where he talks about the notion of counter science being built on an indigenous understanding of science. And he says that it's a kind of science that, or it's a kind of like thinking knowledge that metropolitan science has not yet been able to capture. So he kind of talks about secrecy, silence, and the unknowable as operating as the boundaries of science, but also not just as the boundaries of science, but as the elements of science. And I'm sorry, Bodhi, to to play out your words in front of you, but I wanted to kind of look at the boundaries of Mass Effect Andromeda that we have come across in our conversations, and there are all these what if scenarios, and you mentioned the dialogue, and of course we felt a little disappointed that, as Bodhi said, whatever dialogue is, we are going to one place. But what if we didn't go to that one place? Because the dialogue was actually letting us kind of take those departures in different ways. And I think in the dialogue, in the actions, in those kind of like unwritten or kind of like areas that are kind of fissures that are left in the game, I would argue on purpose, perhaps. Thank you, whoever did that. I see what Bodhi is talking about, the mythologerm kind of in potentia, right? And that, I think, is something that video games rarely do. They, and this is why I started liking this game, because it makes these kind of problems so obvious. And I can see why kind of the standard gamer might not like it, really, because they might be used to a certain kind of very obvious kind of game with kind of the colonialism which is packed into it. But I think also that it is video games. I mean, we've been kind of playing video games in the 70s, and they've grown, and we've had this field of game studies and so on. But I mean, how is it possible that any discussion of science fiction in video games just kind of keeps repeating the same kind of tropes? And I think perhaps I'm not kind of pushing Bodhi's work here, but I'm just saying that we need to think differently. And I see, I mean, actually, this is a paper I've written, and I see perhaps the subaltern, the marginal being important in looking at video games in different ways. And Meghna Jayant's kind of counterfactual 80 Days kind of does that. And there, I think this idea of the mythologerm, comes in. I'm sure it's useful in other genres as well outside of science fiction, but I'm thinking particularly this. But I don't know what both of you would say, really.
I think what is happening now in science fiction is actually also something that we will see more and more in games. We are seeing that shift already, and we will see more and more of this. Is a shift from a certain linearity of everything, linearity of technology. For instance, like the whole logic of tech trees, right? You go from one tech to better tech to better tech to better tech, or you move from one societal stage to another societal stage to another societal stage. I think this kind of narrative, which has been pretty much the lifeblood of science fiction, I think this is now very much challenged in literary science fiction. It is getting challenged in different futurisms, in indigenous futurisms, for example, or Afrofuturisms, or Chinese SF for that matter. So this challenge to this kind of linearity, I think games are full of that possibility, but they haven't played out yet properly. I think games are still coming very much from the same kind of colonial baggage, if one wants to call it. But I would not just call it colonial baggage. I would call it very much the techno-deterministic model. I think games and science fiction are very much coming from that techno-deterministic model, and I think that is the shift that is happening now. And when we see that in games, we will see a lot more fun stuff happening. So yes, I'm actually looking forward to those games. And big open world, which has those games, which has those styles as well.
So the obviously well is more optimistic, which is fantastic. But what do you think? I mean, how do you, because you've been playing this for
Yeah, well, I've played this game, just like the two of you, more than I probably ought to have. But then, yeah, we've played a number of science fiction and speculative fiction games, even just for this series. And I mean, I do think a lot of what we tend to focus on are much smaller games than this. This is a AAA game made by, Electronic Arts is like one of the hugest, firms in games, and is often framed as a sort of titanic establishment figure in some sense. But then, like, a lot of what we've covered for SF is a lot of smaller titles, sometimes even just made by like one person or a team of, 2 or 3. And those can be incredibly imaginative, but also they don't have the financial resources to be weird and experimental in some sense on the scale that this game is. I think the potentials we're finding in this game demonstrate why it's helpful to take big swings at ideas with a huge budget and a big team, right? Even if this one, it came out as a bit of a technical mess, like Bodhi said, that's about shifting to a new system as much as anything else. They were using a new engine, but and feeling a bit overstuffed. I mean, I love a text that feels like it's bursting at the seams a bit and that it's arguing with itself, and this one does. And a smaller game in some ways can't do that. It can have dialogue that's very rich and internally referential, but this game, the mechanics and systems are all kind of in tension with each other in a way that gives you a lot of opportunities to intercede critically. I mean, I do think that these science fiction games are trying to enter a more critical mode, and trying to interrogate some of the hazards and drawbacks of like the technoscientific project, especially the Western technoscientific project. And I think also trying to advocate in a very overt way for particular values. We talked about this game and its Star Trekian kind of embrace of a certain politics of diversity. I think a lot of games that I have enjoyed that are SF games in recent years are about, for example, economic precarity, or about solidarity, about trying to, in a very serious way, kind of like think about collective trauma and think about coalitional politics. And I think that there's going to be more and more science fiction games that are doing that work and doing it really intelligently. I guess the question is, will things that are this big budget and institutionally risky. I mean, this game had a huge budget, and the EA had a lot riding on it. Bioware had a lot riding on it. The Mass Effect IP is an enormously valuable one, and in some ways, they're still in the process of rebooting it. They very famously said that the next Mass Effect game is going to be made by the team that made the original trilogy and not this game. And so, in some sense, saying like, we're gonna, we tried some new voices, we're gonna go back to the old team. And so anyway, I mean, that's a very long-winded way of saying I think I like to see stuff that is this bumpy, done at a big scale that allows you to really kind of immerse yourself in it. I mean, and I do think this game really blossoms. It's probably not to its credit to say it blossoms if you play it like 3 times, like all of us have. Like, I think that really, and then you know what you want to do as well. Because I mean, there are elements of this game we haven't even talked about here in this hour plus. Like, you have an AI implanted in your head. We didn't talk about that at all. There's a whole family drama. You mentioned you have a twin, your dad's the head of the mission, etc. There's this whole, there's entire leagues of sort of narrative and depth in this game that we haven't even touched. And I mean, that's the kind of messiness. I do think like something about science fictional universes, if they're done at scale, can allow for a huge amount of sprawl, which can be productive, but can also feel overwhelming and off-putting to a lot of people.
I'm just kind of beginning to think that we can replace mass with mess, because we've had this word so times.
I hope that it's a productive it's a productive mess. And I mean, clearly this conversation is evidence of that. I think like maybe all of us really like, fissured texts a lot, like, quite a lot. And so it gives us a lot to work with. Like you said, Souvik, it does feel like in this conversation, especially like, well, this is really a game to teach with kind of thing, right? It really does like it would give you so many opportunities to intercede and kind of, it gives you such a rich set of linked examples to talk about both the kind of like triumphs of its representational strategies and also the foibles of it, places where it doesn't quite land, or it leaves a lot of the important stuff unsaid, but it kind of gets into a lot of directions. I think that's what can be really productive about this kind of, again, like doing this stuff at the huge, like you would say like a 30-hour main game, but this is really like a 90-hour game if you immerse, if you want to see everything and you like collecting stuff. There's a lot of stuff to collect. Okay, I'm going to call it for time, but I really, really appreciate both of your insights and playing this again with me. And I had so much fun preparing for this conversation. We're going to keep doing more of these Skill Tree episodes, I should say. So, we have several more planned for this year. Perhaps we'll come back to the Mass Effect universe someday. Bodhi and I have been talking about that. To be notified about upcoming episodes, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/imagineasu. You can also visit our website, which is csi.asu.edu, and you can subscribe to email updates there. You should learn about Bodhi and Souvik more. Souvik said, that he wasn't sure if he should push people towards Bodhi's work. Well, I am overtly pushing both of your work. I think that the books that I talked about, these two writing, like you should read them. I have found them immensely enriching. You can learn more about Bodhi and his work at cofutures.org, and you can learn more about Souvik and his work at csscal.org/faculty_Souvik.php. And we will have those up on screen as well, because I know it's hard to type URLs as they're being read. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the Center for Science and the Imagination for making this event series possible, and especially to Deb and Hakal for editing this episode and our gameplay video. Bodhi, Souvik, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been so much fun.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it was really great fun. Thanks.
Great.